Hi, this is Russ Titleman, and you're listening to Fab 4 Free For All.
And welcome to another exciting edition of the Fab 4 Free For All. We are a whenever the hell we want to podcast, talking about the Beatles and Beatle related and all that good stuff. And tonight we have before I say anything else, I'm Mitch Axelrod, your moderator for tonight's episode. And joining me, as they always do, are
Rob Leonard
and
Tony Triguardo.
Now, you might realize that we have a fourth person here. No, that's not just a homeless guy coming in to talk about the Beatles. Although
bomber.
Yeah, right. But it is Bruce Spizer, the author of so many books on the Beatles, incredible books on the Beatles that are all behind me. See, incredible stuff. Yes, Rob, we are going to be talking about that book. Don't put it up yet because I didn't mention it yet. But that's okay. Bruce, welcome to the Fab 4 Free For All.
Oh, good to be here. I always enjoy falling with you guys.
Oh, okay. The checks must have cleared. So anyway, tonight we are talking. Actually, Bruce came out with a book a few months ago, to coincide with what he thought was probably going to be the release of the Get Back film, the brand new film by Peter Jackson. But unfortunately, as we all know, what happened to that, it got delayed. But Bruce's book didn't, thank goodness. And Rob, you want to hold it up again? Because I will.
Pretend you didn't see it the first time, everyone. Look
yes,
at
it's
that.
called,
That.
It's called The Beatles
book.
Finally Let It Be, compiled by Bruce Spizer with additional contributions by Bill King, Al Sussman, Frank Daniels, Piers Hemmingson, and other Beatles fans. This is, I think, the third book, Bruce, if I'm not mistaken.
Fourth book in the album series. Yeah.
Okay. I know you did, you definitely did Abbey Road.
Pepper and White.
The White Road. The White Road. You did the White Album and you did Pepper. Right. Now, these books are really kind of cool because unlike your other books, which are absolutely amazing, my favorite being The Beatles Are Coming, but that's a different story. These books compile everything about this one album and event into one book instead of having it in another book with other things, which is kind of great because you get everything specific to it right here, which I kind of like. So technically you can do one of these for every album or every couple albums.
Yep.
Well, good. Maybe in the future, and maybe at the end of this, we'll try to get you to tell us what you do next.
All right.
Anyway, I just want to get started. You know, with the whole pandemic, we lost the Get Back film for a while, and we'll get into that later. But how did you? Because we're going to be talking about the book and the movie, meaning the original movie, in this discussion. How did you first learn about what the next Beatles project was going to be, which at that time was Get Back?
I started, the first thing of anything associating to do with it was really TV Guide. They had a 2-page spread saying that the Beatles were working on this new album and they were going to have a TV special of them recording. And it was a picture of them up on the rooftop. And then shortly after that, I heard the song Get Back on the radio. And then the Glenn Campbell Good Time Hour actually showed clips of the Beatles doing Get Back on the rooftop. So literally that TV Guide 2-page spread came alive on my TV, which is very cool. And also Don't Let Me Down. And I began reading Rolling Stone magazine.
Magazine? What's a magazine?
Yes. It was a thing. It was made of paper and it was really strange. And it would seem as if almost every other issue or so, you know, the Beatles Get Back album will be coming out, you know, next month. And then it'll be coming out 2 months later. And it kept getting pushed back. And all of a sudden now, you know, you're into 1970 and the thing's still getting pushed back. And I'd remembered issue of Rolling Stone where they said that the album would be coming out sometime in April or May. However, Apple did not say April or May of which year. And that pretty much summed it up. And so for me, it was, you know, Let It Be comes out and it was like, you know, let it be finally, you know. And so that's kind of the whole concept behind it to me was, you know, the Beatles finally let it be because it took them, you know, over a year and a half really about to get this thing out. And then ironically, of course, the number one question that poor Jeff Jones is always asked at Apple was, when's Let It Be coming out? And so, and then with the Peter Jackson film, even though it was called Get Back, it was, okay, the Beatles finally let it be. So, of course, I had to call this book, The Beatles Finally Let It Be. I do remember on Christmas Eve of 1969, listening to a radio station that was Spanish during the day and would hippie at night, as my Spanish teacher would say. And they had gotten a hold of a Get Back bootleg, and they played the entire bootleg. And I had gotten for Christmas a combination radio cassette player, and I put in the cassette and I recorded the bootleg. And then after that, for reasons unknown, the disc jockey played Barry Maguire's Eve of Destruction. And that's how I got introduced to those songs. And I felt like I had forbidden fruit, because I had Beatles songs that most people didn't have, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
We had a high school trip up to Washington, a bus trip from New Orleans to Washington. And I brought my cassette player, which also had battery power. And I played that for some of my Beatle friends. And, we listened to those songs. I really loved The Long and Winding Road. It was just this beautiful, simple ballad. And when I heard the 45 overproduced by Phil Spector, I was just sickened to my stomach because I just love that plain, simple ballad song. But we'll talk about Spector and the album later.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll good, the good and the bad. But that's kind of how I got introduced to it. And when I got the album, I absolutely loved Two of Us. I thought Spector did a great job on that. And selecting those rooftop performances was great. But I just never could forgive him for The Long and Winding Road and all the weird stuff he did to Let It Be.
Neither could Paul.
Yeah. At the end of Let It Be, Paul was competing with a raunchy guitar solo and brass. And I just didn't like it, but that was my opinion. But what I did like, I really liked. And fortunately, I had a cassette player. So I was able to isolate the songs that I really liked. And that way I didn't have to get up and lift the needle for The Long and Winding Road. I could listen to the piano ballad type.
You talked about delays and everything. And you also talked about the acetate. You talked about the bootleg. Sorry. Yep. Now, the bootleg, can you talk about the origins of the bootleg? Because many people don't know that John might have been one of the first Beatle bootleggers.
Yeah. What happened was John made the mistake of giving it to somebody. What happened was there was a Canadian journalist, actually from Australia, and he went to London to interview George Harrison, and he dropped in John and Yoko's office at Apple and were chatting with them to see how things were going. And John got a phone call at that time, and the phone call happened to be from a guy who was producing this rock and roll event in Toronto. And so basically John asked this guy, since he was Canadian, is this guy on the level? What can you tell me? And he said, yeah, he's on the level. And John decided to go and, of course, play at the Toronto Rock and Roll Festival. And when John got back from the festival, the guy was still there. And his name, I'm just looking it up because I have a terrible memory. Richie York was his name. And Richie York dropped by to see John. And John, I guess, told him about how much fun he had there. And as a present, gave him an acetate, which had songs from Get Back. And of course, John, being innocent, had no idea of it. Somebody might actually, do something with it. And apparently Richie brought it by the radio station, one of the radio stations, and they made a tape. Although we also think maybe Richie made a tape and brought the tape to the radio station because it only has one of the two tracks. So the problem with that particular bootleg is, you only get one half of the stereo tracks. But nonetheless, that was one of the sources. So what happens is it's played in Canada, and a Buffalo radio station gets a strange call from a Canadian, some guy who probably taped it off the air, and says, hey, I got some Beatles songs. You interested in buying them? So they send their program director north of the border. Buffalo's close to the border. He gives the guy $100. He gets the tape, brings it back, and he plays it. Well, what happens is there's another disc jockey at a station in Boston, and he had been having tapes that a underground DJ from LA had given him of Get Back material that Derek Taylor had given him. And they were and they're actually different They were high quality, but they weren't to get back bootleg per se, but they were songs from the session. So in other words, he comes on and he puts that on the air. And of course, people tape that. And the next thing you know, the bootleggers start putting out bootlegs of it. And that's kind of how it all got started. But it all happened with John being very naive and thinking, if I give this to Richie York, why would Richie York give it to somebody who would put it on the air? So,
Bruce, I have a question, but just to get back to a Long and Winding Road for a second.
yeah.
As the guy who's focused on the American releases with many of your books, Long and Winding Road was only released in the United States. Was that done so Paul wouldn't hear it and maybe wouldn't think about it? Because that's one of the reasons he sues the Beatles down the road. But he also was released as a single in the States only. It wasn't released in Great Britain. And I was wondering, was there a reasoning behind that?
I think it may have been more of a case of Phil Spector respecting the fact that in England, singles were considered something separate. And if they were on an album, they generally didn't get released. He initially did that, as you recall, with Come Together and Something, where it was not released as a single in the UK initially. And after it did so well in the States, they decided to do it in the UK. But since people by then had bought the album, the single, of course, didn't sell that many copies. I think it was a case maybe of Alan Klein coming in and saying, that we do singles in the US and not so much in the UK. So that's what I think it is.
Because I could see Alan Klein saying, well, Paul hates it tremendously. Let's put it out as a single.
Yeah.
Well,
You don't like it either, do you, Rob?
I've never liked that song at all. I hate the overproduction. The only version I really like is the Wings Over America version. It's the only one I really ever liked.
Yeah.
So
also, I wanted to just ask you. You said you went on a trip to, is it East Africa?
Yes, East Africa
with your parents.
Yeah.
Talk about that trip and how the Beatles came into that trip.
Yeah, it was really great because from reading Rolling Stone, I knew that the album in the UK came with this big book. So I wanted to get that. So we flew into London and we actually had about a 4 or 5 hour layover. And my dad said, well, why don't we go into London? And we just woke up to a cab driver and said, how much do you charge us to drive us around London for a while and get us back to make our flight? So we drove around and he's showing us all the sights. And I said, I'd like to see Carnaby Street. And then I said, I'd like to go to a record store. So I went into the record store and I asked for the Let It Be album. And it was £3. And my parents said, oh, that's kind of expensive, isn't it? And I said, well, my birthday's coming up. And they said, you're going to have to lug it through Africa. I don't care. I want it. So I went ahead and I got it and went home. And of course, I played it only once or twice because I already had the US pressing. And I didn't want to scratch up the British pressing. And I looked through the booklet until it fell apart, of course, like they all did.
True.
And then many years later, I was at a Beatle Fest. And I was talking to a couple of people, and I said that I had the Let It Be album, but, mine was on Parlophone, and I had bought it, in 1970. And they said, oh, no. You got it much later than that. And I said, no, I bought it in 1970. And everyone said, no, that's not possible. Or maybe you mixed it up, over the years. I said, no, I did not. Jim Hansen, the Blue Jay Way, taps me on the shoulder. He says, Bruce, I believe you, I think. He says, is the prefix on it start with 1 P or 2 Ps? How the hell would I remember that? So when I went home, I looked at it, and to be slightly crude, it was the happiest time I ever saw a PP. And,
well, now as we get older, it's happy too.
Happy too. So I called up Jim, and I said, Jim, it does have a double P prefix. He said, Bruce, you, for some reason in London, got the rare export copy that's worth over $2,000.
Wow. Do you still have it?
I still do. And I told my parents that, and they said, are you going to sell it? I said, of course not. I carried it over Africa for 3 weeks.
But see,
they just wanted they wanted the proceeds.
But
They want that money back.
Yeah, since 1970, with inflation, you actually paid $2,000 for it then.
Nah, inflation isn't that bad. Come on.
Why did we get why did the U.S. not get the box? Do we know?
I think it was just a case of Alan Klein wanting to sell as many copies as possible and thinking that a higher price would frighten people away. And United Artists probably thought the same thing.
Yeah.
So they ended up selling like 4 million copies pretty quick. And so I think it was strictly economics. And as nice as it would have been to have the book, I think if you look at it from a business standpoint, they very well may have made the right choice.
Yeah, but I mean, by then too, I would imagine a lot of the creative control with regards to that project, the Beatles had cut it loose. So I don't think it wasn't like they were going to pipe in and say, oh, we really want to have the book in all markets. They were kind of out of it by then. But
yeah, Alan Klein was running the show. And I think if Alan said, look, I think we need to do this in the States, at that point, John would have said, fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Bruce, I had a question about just sort of and I guess this goes into the later part of the book where you're talking to people about the experience of, how Let It Be, was reflected in all the different, in the different countries and in the different, how it fit into context. But I feel like Let It Be's always had a kind of an odd place among Beatle fans, Beatle collectors, especially through the generations as fans have come and gone. It's almost as though it at first, when you were experiencing it as a first generation fan, it was and especially because you were following it so closely with what was going on with Get Back. Yeah. Now, the casual fan, even then, and maybe the person that wasn't reading Rolling Stone wasn't doing that. So it suddenly appears this, quote, new phase Beatles album. Yeah. And the people who were in the know and had been reading Rolling Stone and had been seeing the articles about kind of the idea that it was now kind of over. And granted, the announcement had sort of come out too. So it was, do you sort of like in the book, can you reflect some of the ways where you kind of show the up and down of what Let It Be meant to the different, the different countries, the different generations of Beatle family? Did you sort of feel that as well when you were putting the book together?
Yeah. I mean, in my case, to me, the album was a disappointment because it was the first time I bought a Beatles album where I really felt like lifting the needle off of one or two of the tracks. And I never really felt that way about a Beatles album. And so that kind of threw me about it. And,
which ones, by the way? Just, I didn't mean to interrupt, but for instance, if you had to give me one.
Long and Winding Road and Let It Be in particular.
What, those you wanted to lift off?
I did not want to hear them. No, I couldn't. I didn't like the way they sounded.
Oh, okay.
I love the songs.
Okay.
But I didn't like
it.
Yeah. The songs are great.
Yeah.
But I would rather listen to the single. What I found interesting was that people, second generation fans in particular, love the album version and don't like the single version nearly as much. And I ask why. And they say, well, that guitar solo has such balls. It's great.
Yeah.
But I think also they probably heard that first because they didn't go out and buy the Let It Be 45.
You got it.
When they were rediscovering the Beatles, they bought the Let It Be album. So therefore, their first hearing of Let It Be probably was on the album. And when they heard the single and George does this tasty laid back guitar solo, it's like, oh, that's wimpy. I prefer the other. So I think that has part to do with it. But if you think of all the different variations, you have the Get Back bootlegs, you have the Let It Be album itself that comes out. You have the anthology tracks, which you can take those and do your own version of Let It Be. You have Let It Be Naked. And when Let It Be Naked came out, I absolutely loved the way it sounded. And when I started doing the book, something strange happened. As much as I loved the way it sounded, to me, it had no soul.
None.
Agree
with you.
And so I sat there and I said, the tragic thing about this is the Beatles have never optimized that session. Every release is brilliant and flawed at the same time. I'm very curious as to what will happen in the event Giles Martin does something with it. And, I would hope that would get closer to, because I suspect his mix on Long and Winding Road and Let It Be would be very different than what Phil Spector did. And if that's the case, maybe we finally get that Let It Be album that is, to me, satisfying from start to finish. So I have my fingers crossed.
It's also, too, I think where I was thinking, too, Bruce, was the idea that, we saw it in context, even as a second generation fan, but somebody that came into the Beatles, say 71, 72, we saw it as that was like the breakup album
Yeah.
And that was what was Roy Carr and Tony Tyler, the Cardboard Tombstone,
Yeah.
But in later generations, where they stopped and weren't able to listen to the albums in order as they happened,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be curious to see whether or not this leads to kind of like a rediscovery of the record just as a piece of music, just as an album, as opposed to us, the hardcore Beatle fans, always having the context that it indicated the end.
And I think with me, I really think if there is a Giles Martin mix, I think I'll find that satisfying because I've loved the work that he's done so far. So, and then of course, when we start talking about the original film and that 5-minute clip that everybody's going gaga over, that will be interesting too when we get to the film, because I have a lot to say, about that as well.
We will.
One thing, Bruce, about this, excuse me, Mitch, for a second.
Sure.
One thing that really bothered me about Let It Be Naked, I actually liked most of it. I just hated that they didn't put that coda on Get Back, and they said,
yes,
well, it wasn't on the original thing, but
wrong.
songs,
yeah,
the other songs had different parts flown in from different versions.
Look, no, I will tell you that when I first heard it, and I heard it in a BMW being driven by a Capitol executive. He had gotten an advanced CD of it, but he was afraid if he played it in the office and someone from Capitol saw I was hearing it, he could get in trouble. So we went out to lunch, and in his car, we listened to it. And I was like, where's the coda? So many years later, I was over at Abbey Road about 2008 when they were doing the remasters. And I talked to Alan Rouse, and I said, and Alan was just, when I was introduced to him, he was a wonderful man. And I was told he can be very grumpy and very this and very that. And I said, Alan, I understand you can dish it out. Can you take it? He said, absolutely. I said, well, we're going to get along great. And he says, well, what could you possibly complain about? And I said, no coda on Get Back. And he said, well, there was no coda on that tape. I said, Alan, how many takes of Get Back are there? About 20? He said, yes. I said, and how many of those tapes have codas, Alan? About 17 or 18? Yes. And I said, and what does George say at the end of the song, Master Take, if you let the tape play out? He goes, yeah. I said, he says, we missed the ending on that one, didn't we? Yes. And I said, and when Paul worked to have the single come out that Easter, what did Paul add to the end of that take, Alan? A coda. So Alan said, Bruce, what do you want me to do? Make you a private copy with the coda? I said, yes, I'd like that. Unfortunately, he never did. But I agree 100%. Get Back needs the coda.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's a half a song without it.
And you know what? Just getting on that theme of the Beatles, the Let It Be Naked, I need John's little beginning before Two of Us. I just do.
Yeah, that's what I said. It has no soul without it. But bear in mind, the object of that project was, let's pretend that they did Let It Be as a normal Beatles album, just like Abbey Road, where we're going to pick the best take of the best songs.
Right.
And that's what they did. Yeah. So mission accomplished for what they did.
But isn't it strange that having done that, as you said, Bruce, you ended up with something with no soul?
Yeah.
Isn't that really odd?
Yeah. And I didn't realize it at the time because it sounded so spectacular. But when I did the book and played it from start to finish, it was like, oh boy, thou hast no soul.
Well, look at that.
I would have smacked somebody upside the head for the fly on the wall disc. That's what. Why?
That disc is literally on my wall.
Wow. 20 minutes of my life I never get back. No pun intended.
So I have a two-part question. First part is there were some events that were supposed to happen that you talk about that never happened. Like the Beatles showing up on Sullivan just to shake hands, attending the premiere, which we'll get into, and the TV special. But also after that, I would like you to talk about how the Beatles Again album fits in to the chronology of where we are to get to Let It Be.
Yeah. Well, let's do the second part first, because, I think everybody was standing around waiting for this Get Back album. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's like this new album called The Beatles Again. And then when you pulled the record out, this is the Beatles again, but then somewhere else it said, Hey Jude, and you didn't know what the name of the record even was, which was kind of strange. And some people said it was done, just to kind of, tide you over to the next. It was actually done because Alan Klein saw a way to make the Beatles some money. They had signed a new contract, and basically he went to Alan Steckler, who was his assistant at ABCO, and said, is there something we can put out with the Beatles? And he said, well, there are a lot of Beatles songs that were never on an album. And so he went ahead and put the project together. So that's what happened there. I think one of the fan recollections in my book was someone who said that his mom went to the record store and brought him back the new Beatles album, and he was expecting, the Get Back album, and it was something with songs he already had, so he was very disappointed.
Because there's nowhere on the album actually that it says the name Hey Jude. I mean, I know the Slicks that were never put out had it, but I don't think it says the Beatles Hey Jude or the Beatles Again anywhere except maybe the spine, but it's not on the front or the back.
Yeah. And then some of them later came with stickers that said, Hey Jude.
Right, Hey Jude. And those, if you have that now, you got some money there. But, it's funny because when I got it, being an 8-year-old kid, I loved it because, first of all, it's the Beatles. So, and I thought it was the Beatles at that point re-recording their stuff. I didn't know it was just a compilation. So I turned it over. I put it on. I said, wow, they sound the same. Obviously it was just that, but it was
stereo.
Yeah. Well, that's true. There was some true stereo there. But it was, I thought it was a really good album. I just had no idea what it was supposed to be at that time, And also the in Spain, I know this. In Spain, Ballad of John and Yoko was actually not on that album, The Beatles Again.
Yeah, it was. I remember when the Ballad of John and Yoko was on the debut of the TV show The Music Scene. I remember they showed the Ballad of John and Yoko, and when John went Christ, they bleeped it out and they showed a road sign with an exclamation point on it.
Yeah.
Yep. That's kind of cool. So talk about the events that we never got to see.
Yeah, these were ideas that Alan Klein had that were never going to happen. First of all, there were problems of could you even get John and George in the U.S. because of the drug arrests. So that was an issue to begin with. And then why would they want to go to the Ed Sullivan show and shake hands with a bunch of people? That just, it was Alan Klein's vision. I mean, he wanted to put the Beatles on tour. He wanted to do a lot of things to make money that the Beatles just weren't up for.
But would they, you think, had things, again, speculation, had things been a little more acrimonious during the filming, do you think maybe the Beatles would have considered a little tour?
I know that Paul certainly wanted that. I mean, the way Get Back happened to begin with was that Paul got really excited about the Hey Jude Revolution videos they had shot at Twickenham and how much fun it was to perform in front of an audience, even though they would just lip sync. Well, they were actually singing to a recorded tape, and he loved it. And it was his idea of we're going to do a concert at the Roundhouse, and we'll do a bunch of songs from the White Album and some rock and roll standards. And then it was, we'll do new songs. And that's how the whole project evolved. Paul certainly was pushing it. If Alan Klein had not stepped in and the Eastmans were running things, maybe they would have gone back on tour. Who knows? I mean, George, even after the group broke up, was still talking about, we'll get together again and record another album. So I don't think any of the Beatles, except maybe Paul and John, really knew it was over when Paul made his famous statements.
Bruce, what about Glyn Johns? How does he get picked to compile the record? And he had a bad thing about picking maybe the bad versions.
Yeah,
he seemed happy to pick the songs that weren't as thought out or played out the way they maybe should have been.
Yeah, here's the thing. Glyn Johns was brought on by Paul to serve as a balance engineer. And, he was over at Twickenham with them. George Martin went to Twickenham occasionally. When they moved to Apple, both Glyn Johns and George Martin were there for the latter sessions in particular. But at the very first sessions where they were just messing around and doing stuff like Save the Last Dance for Me and things, Glyn Johns just fell in love with that stuff. And he would go over to Olympic and mix some tapes. And so basically, he was pleased with what he was hearing and thought it would be fun and got this idea, let's just do the Beatles in the studio kind of loose and all. And the problem was when he went to compile the album, he favored those versions. In other words, logically, if the Beatles did the song Long and Winding Road on the 26th of January and on January 31st, chances are they would do it better on January 31st because they would have been rehearsing it more. Same thing with Two of Us. And so some of the versions that he picked were earlier versions that he thought were fun and spontaneous, but they weren't as good. For example, I've Got a Feeling, you've got a great rooftop version, yet he picks an early version where the song falls out before the best part of the song, which is John and Paul singing in counterpoint. So, and then Two of Us, he picks a slow plodding version rather than the upbeat version that Spector picked. So I think that the big flaw for Glenn Johns and his downfall was not picking the best version of each song.
Definitely.
All right, we're going to.
Those are the acetates that went out, though. The bootleg.
Yeah, the bootlegs.
Unfortunately.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a break. We're talking with Bruce Spizer, the author of many books, but The Beatles Finally Let It Be, the latest book. And we will return to talk about Let It Be, the film, in just a moment.
Hi, folks. This is Tony from Fab 4 Free For All. As Mitch has mentioned several times, the cast of Fab 4 Free For All do not profit in any way doing these shows for all of you. In fact, we actually lose money because of studio time and other production expenses. Now, we have looked into show sponsors, but for a number of reasons, we've decided it would be in the best interest of all of us, including you, our listeners, not to have sponsored ads in our shows. So, what we've done is set up a Patreon account. Patreon is a crowdfunding platform that allows artists to obtain funding from patrons on a recurring basis. Now, it can be as little or as much as you think you can send to us for the work that we put into providing quality Fab 4 Free-for-All shows. Now, we know that we have thousands of worldwide listeners, and if each of you just contributed $1 a month, that's just 25 cents per episode. We would have enough to retire and not have to do these shows. Sorry. Seriously, though, we've gotten some great feedback from everyone about how much these shows mean to you, and we feel the same way. But it would be nice if we could break even in terms of costs so that we can continue to bring these shows to you in a timely fashion. Yeah, I know, we can be delayed every once in a while, but that's because, as John Lennon so beautifully said, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. But we do vow to make every effort to have a quality show to you every week. We only ask that everyone go and visit patreon.com to at least check out what it's all about and to see if you can contribute a little something in return for all the hard work and effort that we put into these shows for you. Just do a search for Fab 4 Free For All and tell us that you give a buck about what we do. Thanks to all of you for being such great loyal listeners.
And we're back on the Fab 4 Free-for-All talking with author Bruce Spizer about the Beatles Let It Be and his new book, The Beatles Finally Let It Be, out now on 498 Productions books, right?
Yes.
Oh, good. I got that right. 498.
Yes,
do you want to just tell people real quick what 498 means? Some people may not get the joke or get the meaning.
Well, the actual story about it was when I was going to do my first book, I was going to self-publish. I needed a company name. And I love the fact that the initial 45 released by the Beatles on VJ had the Beatles misspelled with 2 T's. So I was going to name the company Double T Productions. And when I applied with the Secretary of State for that, they said there's an oil drilling company in Louisiana called Double T Productions. And I was looking at the 45 and it had VJ 498, which was the catalog number. So I said 498 Productions.
All right, cool.
But
very cool. Either way.
But the story gets crazier because at my very first Beatle Fest, I was staying at the Overflow Hotel and I go to check in. I hadn't done the book yet, hadn't even thought of doing a book. And when I got the room number I had was 498. I take the shuttle bus over to the fest, and the first record I buy is a copy of VJ 498 with Beatles misspelled on one side and spelled correctly on the other.
Oh, wow.
And then my driver's license has 498 in it. And my parents' checking account, which when they got older I was monitoring, also had $4.98 in it.
$498?
Well,
Or
not that.
Oh, I
The
know.
numbers.
I'm kidding.
So the numbers follow me around.
That's pretty. Just
Wild.
real quick, I know because we do have collectors in the Fab Four Free for All. What did you buy that first copy, by the way, with the misspelling on one, and because it must have been a long time ago at first Beatle Fest.
Yeah, it was. I bought it in 1997, I believe, and I probably paid about $1,500 for it.
So it was still a lot at that time.
It was, yeah, it was.
Wow.
Because it was pretty rare.
Very
and I
cool.
remember after I showed it to Gary Hine, he offered to buy it from me for a profit so he could sell it for even more. I wasn't about to sell it.
Oh, wow. That's pretty, that is a rarity. That's pretty cool. So we're going to talk about Let It Be, the film now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I remember seeing the clips for the film of, if I'm not mistaken, the song Let It Be, and there was one more. I'm sorry.
Two of us.
Two of us. Thank you. But that was on the Ed Sullivan special in March of 70.
Yeah,
right?
Ed Sullivan Salutes the Beatles, which I also taped off the television to get a nice clean version of Two of Us.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about that? Do you know how that came about? Because it was so wild. There's Steve and Edie, and for those who don't know, Steve Lawrence and Edie Gourmet, and there was just a bizarre. There Edward Villella, I believe, dancing, which was actually kind of nice, but a weird. And you don't see it at all anymore. You could find it on like YouTube a little bit, but why have we never seen that again?
I think probably the rights might be a little bit tricky. I don't know. I don't think Sofa Productions has put that one out. Certainly not separately.
Right.
And I mean, and look, they wanted to do something special, and with Ed Sullivan, he had done a lot for them, obviously, over the years, and they weren't going to show up at the show or anything, but you could have these two film clips, and the idea was it would be a special saluting the Beatles. I mean, you had a show, The Music of Lennon and McCartney, that came out in the UK a few years earlier, where the Beatles actually showed up and played, live on that show. So I think it was, not a bad idea. I mean, I liked it because I got to get an idea of what the film was going to look like. By the time the film had come out, I had seen 4 songs, Let It Be, Two of Us, Get Back, and Don't Let Me Down. And in those days, I mean, my memory was such that I remembered exactly what those clips looked like. I remembered at the end of Get Back.
Okay.
I was also on the Glenn Campbell Good Time Hour.
Oh, okay.
Do you remember, Bruce? Were those because I recently saw the clips, but I can't remember. Were those the same cuts from the film, or were those unique cuts?
The Get Back one was pretty much the same. The Don't Let Me Down was a unique one where it mixed stuff from the studio and stuff on the rooftop, and it was just kind of a hodgepodge of things. And I don't think it's ever been seen since, except on bootlegs. It's certainly, the one collection does not use the one that was on the Glenn Campbell Good Time Hour.
And the Sullivans, the ones they used on Sullivan, those were direct from the film, though, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So when did you first get aware that the film was now coming out? Because that didn't come out until later.
Yeah, well, the film itself came out, like in the late spring. And by that time, we had known that the Beatles had broken up. And so in some ways, it was tough going to see the film because you knew the Beatles had broken up. And then there was this woman here, Yoko, that was there. And you wondered, did she cause the breakup or not? And of course, that would be very unfair to think, but it was only natural to think that. The first part of the film I found kind of depressing. I mean, they were in this big sound stage, and you could tell it was a sour vibe. I mean, George and Paul get into this argument. But then when they go over to Apple, the vibe changes. And, they have the music for For You Blue, which is kind of an upbeat blues number, as George described, a happy 12-bar blues. And Billy Preston's there, and, the whole vibe changes. And, of course, the rooftop concert. So that as depressing as I found the first third or so of the film, I walked out of the theater happy because of the rooftop concert. And also, once again, getting to hear my favorite song, The Long and Winding Road without Phil Spector strings. So I really enjoyed the film.
Yeah, the first third is so when they do like You've Really Got a Hold on Me, and they it's like they never played the song before. And there's a lot of things in that first third that are just like is this the Beatles?
Mhm.
And then you're right. Then the rooftop and the studio session afterwards, which was actually before,
For the film.
they're playing full songs. They look like they're having a little bit of fun, especially on the rooftop.
Yeah.
And the rooftop was a great way to end the movie.
Absolutely.
So
As I said, this film experience, just there was something somber about it, knowing the Beatles had broken up, but the rooftop concert for me saved it. And I enjoyed most of the film. And when you walked out with, that classic line of, hope we pass the audition. And then you have that little coda of Get Back with Paul laughing and having fun. And the whole thing was just, it was a good experience on the way home, shall we say.
There you go. Mitch?
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, we neglected to talk about Phil Spector's involvement on the album. I wanted to go back. We'll get back to the film, so to speak. But I did want to talk about Phil Spector's involvement. Can we talk about that a while, Bruce?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at it. Oh, sorry. Oh, anyway, here's the thing. Here's the thing about it. Alan Klein was concerned when he heard the Get Back tapes. And he felt, Abbey Road is his assistant, Alan Steckler, said, was so smooth it just oozed out of the speakers. And here were these rough tapes. And he wanted them polished a bit. And in the back of his mind, he's thinking, Phil Spector could do something with that. And as it turns out, Phil Spector happened to be in London. George Harrison knew he was in London. And John calls up George, I've got this song I just wrote. I want to get a bunch of people together. It's called Instant Karma. And George was like, well, Phil Spector's in town. Why don't we see if he'll produce it? So they get Phil Spector in, and Phil Spector produces the Instant Karma single. And that session went really well. And so based on that, George and John got the idea, and Klein may have suggested it to him, or they just subliminally got it. But anyway, they thought, well, what if we give these tapes to Spector? And so John and George invite him to do it. And at the initial remix sessions that take place at Abbey Road, Alan Klein and George Harrison attend those sessions. And then later on, when he does the orchestra session on April 1, which of course we know is April Fool's Day, Ringo is there because he wants a bigger drum sound. Spector always liked two drummers. And so Ringo's playing drums with himself, essentially, from the recorded tracks in the orchestra. And the session was pretty crazy. And Ringo kind of had to pull Phil aside and tell him to cool it, But anyway, that was it. And then he finished the mixes the next day. So it was a fairly quick remixing job that Spector did. But it was done at John and George's suggestion. Paul, of course, was not made aware of it and was not terribly pleased when he heard what Spector did to the songs, particularly The Long and Winding Road.
Yeah, there's that famous memo that Paul wrote, huh?
Yeah.
Where he says, he lays out a few of the things and says at the very end, and don't do it again.
Yeah.
Which is kind of really funny.
Yeah.
And what about the overproduced line?
Yeah, that was great. The album itself, when you looked at the label, it said reproduced for disc by Phil Spector. And that angered George Martin because George Martin was like, I produced these sessions. And EMI said, yeah, but you weren't the last person. So he said, so then I told him, well, why don't you just put on it produced by George Martin, overproduced by Phil Spector? He said, they didn't like that idea.
Hey, Rob, you look like you want to say something.
If you think about it, so many things come out of this Get Back session. I mean, it was, pushed through by Paul. Oh, we got to go back. Let's do it live. Because, let's be honest, White Album wasn't as together as maybe they wanted to be. But it also leads to so many tangents. You got Alan Klein coming in. You got Abbey Road getting done because they realized what happened with Let It Be is not the way to end the careers of the Beatles. The Beatles Again album ends up coming out because the delay with the Let It Be album. Spector gets hired by John for a bunch of records and by George for All Things Must Pass, and then a couple of tracks after that. So it's interesting how this album or these sessions led, branched off into many different things over the next few years for the now solo Beatles or soon to be solo Beatles.
Yeah, it is a very fascinating thing. And you wonder first of all, if Klein hadn't come in, it would have been a TV special. And obviously it was much better to make it a movie. There's a lot more money in a movie than selling the rights to the BBC and NBC or ABC and a few things like that. So that was a really good idea Alan Klein had. Unfortunately, I kind of wish they would have left Well Enough alone. Even though the original Get Back album had its flaws, it still was kind of cool. It had a lot of soul and character. So,
yeah.
And I have a question about the Let It Be album. You said United Artists released in the States only.
Yeah.
Is that okay? But why was A Hard Day's Night the only one that had the United Artists label on it? Was there?
If we go back to the film deal, for some strange reason, the film deal that Brian signed with United Artists, it was a 3-film deal. That was easy. But the weird part about it was that United Artists, the guy who was interested in getting the film for UA was interested in doing something for United Artists Records. His idea was, we'll probably lose money on A Hard Day's Night, but we'll make money on the film soundtrack in the States. So the idea was that they had 2 soundtrack albums. And so A Hard Day's Night is your first soundtrack album. Help is on Capitol. Yellow Submarine isn't on United Artists, which means that the Let It Be album is on United Artists Records. It is pressed, however, with Apple labels for the same reason that the Beatles were on Capitol, but they were pressed with Apple labels. So they had told United Artists they wanted an Apple label on it, and that was no issue. Why does it have a red label rather than green? Alan Steckler, who worked with Alan Klein at ABCO, felt special albums should have special labels. Thus, it had a red label. Why does All Things Must Pass have an orange label? He told George, this is a special album. It should have a special colored label. George picked orange.
All Beatle records were special. They would have all had a different color.
Well, yeah,
That's great.
But do you know anything about the pirated record? Because I think there were more pirated records.
There were more pirates, yeah.
Yeah, what happened was that United Artists, after about 2 or so years, took the album out of its catalog. And so there was a void in the market. You could not go and buy Let It Be. So bootleggers thought, well, we'll just put it out ourselves. And it was that way for a while. And then when Capitol ended up buying the catalog of United Artists Records, then Capitol went ahead and put it out as a non-gatefold album. And Capitol put out Let It Be, I think, in the later 70s. So it ended up eventually getting on Capitol anyway. But that's why there were so many bootlegs, was there was a void in the market.
Is there a way to easily tell what you have?
Look at the label. If the label's kind of a washed out red, it's garbage. Yeah.
Yeah, and if the text is smeared, I mean, there were so many bootlegs.
So getting back to the movie, a subject close to Tony's heart, and some things that everybody's heard of, but maybe not many people know exactly what we all mean when we say it. But the Niagara Reels, the story of I know, Tony, the story of the Niagara. Can we explain what the Niagara Reels were and are, and why they're important to hear?
Yeah, well, when you're doing the film, they had cameras, but you also needed sound. And rather than just have a microphone hooked up to a camera, the idea was they were going to have tape recorders, and they had 2 of them. And the idea was these reels were going to run out after, I think it was about 9 minutes or something. And when that one ran out, they'd hopefully have another one running at that time, so that between the 2 tape machines, you'd have everything. You didn't quite get everything, but you got most. For the most part, it worked well. But the problem was, if you were mid-song and the tape ran out on the A recorder, and then you were relying on the B recorder, because these machines were in different places in the studio or in the sound stage, it sounded totally different and the balance was off. So there are some problems when you go from the A reel to the B reels. Mm-hmm. But you did get a lot of really good stuff. I mean, the ideal takes is if the entire song is on an A reel or on a B reel. And unfortunately, some of the better performances you might lose mid-song. But why it's important is that somebody absconded those tapes or bought them, or who knows how they got them. And all of a sudden they start leaking out these bootlegs and incredible stuff that nobody had ever heard before. The stuff that wasn't in the movie, wasn't on the album, wasn't on the first bootlegs. And there they were. And the ultimate collection that you can get now is 83 discs of, just about everything. And yes, I've listened to all 83 discs. And yes, a lot of it is garbage. And there's some hidden gems in there, though. Some really good stuff in there as well.
A lot of people like the I Lost My Little Girl, which is 5.5 minutes, but it's just John remembering, 2 lines of it, but just doing it differently and having fun. And it's good quality. So that's kind of cool too, isn't it?
I like that one. That's one of the ones that I would say if someone said, pick about 40 of these things, I'd certainly have to pick that one. I mean, they did a lot of old stuff. And then, of course, you had the Weaklings when they did their album, they picked one of those things off the Niagara Reels as well. So
I would be curious to see, Bruce, how much canteen footage, how much of the cafeteria footage. I know that Michael Lindsay-Hogg had hidden cameras around, and we know there were hidden microphones around, and there's some stuff on those Niagara Reels, and our listeners know because we've talked about it, that is absolutely mind-blowing that happens in the cafeteria. Particularly the conversations between Paul and Linda and Michael Lindsay-Hogg, and then they're joined by Ringo later and stuff. But, there's that specifically, I always think of that scene where, Paul, whether he's joking or not, proposes the idea of having the live news, media around Twickenham, and then, the final tear-off sheet from the AP being this just in, Beatles break up, But I'm wondering, with what we've seen of the Peter Jackson film in that 5 mind-blowing, joyful minutes, is he going to temper it with some of the factual stuff that let it be? I rave about how I just can't stand Michael Lindsay-Hogg as a director. I think he just went in there with an agenda, and he made a documentary that was going to show what we already knew had happened, in a way. And I just, there's so many things I can't stand about the film. But with Peter Jackson doing kind of delightfully finding all this wonderful footage, are we going to have the moment where George says, see you around the clubs? Are we going to have?
He never says that.
No, he sort of says it, but he says,
basically he walks out and says, call NME and get a few replacements.
Yeah, exactly. And then, the best is when Paul says to Maureen, learn A, D, E, and you're in. I love that. That's like one of my favorite bits. But are we going to see any of that, or are we? I
mean, what I don't know is whether the cameras were rolling on that. We know the tapes were.
That's what I'm curious. If the Niagaras were rolling, were the cameras necessarily rolling?
Not necessarily. They may have been, and look, I hope he doesn't do a total whitewash on it. And I think that he probably will have a little bit of the tension, and I think doing so would probably be a good idea, because if you have that little tension at the beginning and then at the end, you've got them all dancing around arm in arm, and that's what life's like when you're with a group of people all the time like that.
With brothers, yeah.
It's like the 4 of us tonight. There was a time when we said, Mitch, your voice sounds too low. Yet at the end, we're all happy.
You're happy because I muted myself and I'm leaving. Why don't you get? Wait, should I now say? Why don't you get Ken?
You will get Ken.
Come on! I'm just kidding.
Good. No, but I mean, it's true. You're absolutely right, Bruce. It turns that idea of that movie now, it's starting to make it storytelling instead of it just being this, this documentary about the Beatles breaking up. Now it becomes a story,
And I think too, from looking at the film, first of all, people were like, well, were you surprised? And I said, no, because I had seen what he did with out of sync black and white World War I footage from 1918, 1919, whatever.
Yeah.
And thought, if he can do that, imagine what he can do with color 16 millimeter film.
Yeah.
From 1969. Yeah, I think he can handle that.
But let's talk about Michael Lindsay-Hogg for a second. Tony mentioned the word agenda. Everybody says he had an agenda. Now we know he was there for everything. So, he may, especially in light of what we saw the 5 minutes, which is just absolutely joyful and incredible and colorful and unbelievable. Can't wait. But again, Michael Lindsay-Hogg was there. So he might have done his 88 minutes based on what he saw and the vibe was. Now, Peter Jackson has 56 hours after the fact, so he wasn't actually there. So somewhere in the middle, they always say somewhere in the middle is the truth. I'm hoping that, maybe I don't know if Peter Jackson is going to have his own agenda, but at some point, do you think they have a gag order on Michael Lindsay-Hogg right now? Because we haven't heard a word from him, and you would have thought that you would have heard something, considering after the 5 minutes, now everybody thinks, oh my God, what did Michael Lindsay-Hogg give us? He gave us depressing crap. You would have thought that maybe he would have come out and defended himself.
He very well may. I don't think there's any gag order on him. I don't, but look, here's the thing about it. Michael Lindsay-Hogg experienced it. And also he was frustrated because he was concerned about, the Beatles aren't going to do what I want them to do. I want them to do a concert. They're not going to do a concert. They're not going to do this. And he probably thought doing the film was a pain in the ass. And at the end of the day, they did have the ending of the film, the rooftop concert. But I think for him, it was probably very hard on him in a way that Peter Jackson, as you say, is sitting back and not doing the grunt work, but just looking at what was done. And sure, it's a different vibe for him. But the work that they did on it, the colors, the thing just pops in a way that, when they blew up the 16 millimeter to 32 millimeter film, that process back then wasn't what you could do today. Now, you digitalize it, and now when you blow it up, it looks gorgeous. And so that's part of the problem too. It wasn't shot to be a big screen film. It was shot to be seen on a small TV screen. And so that's part of the reason why it probably looked the way it looked.
And also the fact that when the movie gets re-released to video, from what we've heard, it will also include the original version of Let It Be, which has been waiting for 20 years, cleaned up and beautiful. Ever since really the anthology shows that, hey, this looks good and it sounds good. So he'll at least get to see his version. They're not going to hide it, but they're just going to get a different version with it now.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the right and responsible thing to do. I jokingly said that they should also, on the Blu-ray disc, do a dub of the VHS tape so we can know the way it looked like back in the day.
Nice.
Bruce, in your books, what I love about it is you give the fans a chance to react and tell how they felt either now or back then. Yeah. Is there anything for this particular album, any fan recollection that really struck you in a either a good way, bad way, indifferent way, or revelatory way?
Well, I think the ones that I had the most fun doing was I called up Ken Mansfield and I said, Ken, you were on the rooftop. You've written about being on the rooftop, but could you write me something different? And Ken did. And then I thought, okay. And I called up Kevin Harrington, and he had come up. He was a roadie, basically held up the lyrics that John could read, and he had written a book, and there was a small portion of his book on the rooftop concert. And I asked him, I said, can I use an excerpt from that? He said, sure. So I did that. I talked to Chris O'Dell, and I said, can I extract something from your book? Absolutely, Bruce. And Chris ended hers with looking over the edge and seeing the crowd. And I thought, well, I've got to get someone who was in the street. And then, I knew somebody who was an Apple Scruff, and I shot her an email and I said, were you at the rooftop concert? Yes, I was. Can you write about it? So the first 4 fan recollections have 3 people who are on the roof, segueing into Chris O'Dell looking at the crowd below and someone writing about what it was like to be in the crowd below. So that was kind of cool. I also got Lizzie Bravo to write something about, singing the backing vocals, which was fun. And then I got a guy who sent me something from Russia, and he had said that he had a tape. It was a VHS tape that had Help and Let It Be on it. And he was able to get the tape from somebody and eventually own it. And of course, he would just watch it over and over again. So it's always fun when you get somebody from Russia telling you, their experiences with the Beatles, because the Beatles were a worldwide phenomena, even in Russia. So, I think those are the ones that really mean a lot to me.
Bruce, what I wish, I wish I would have known about the book, because one of my favorite memories, and I've told this before on other shows, of our shows. My grandmother, a Yiddish grandmother who was actually born in Argentina and spoke fluent Spanish and Yiddish, which was very weird. Yeah, very, very odd. But she stopped liking the Beatles when they grew mustaches. Right? It just, she was old school. And I'll never forget the day when we brought home the single of Let It Be, 1970. I went in, you go into the store, you pick it out of the slot and you get a picture sleeve and you get happy and you go home. And I said to my grandmother, we're going to play this for you. And she looked at the picture sleeve and we had the big RCA console. And she said, I don't want to hear it because, obviously they looked
like a bunch of girls. They look like girls.
Paul even had the mustache and beard. He didn't look like cute little Paulie anymore. She said, I don't want to hear it. I said, Grandma, please. So she said, okay. She sat down. We played her whatever the 3 minutes plus of Let It Be. She absolutely loved it, but she wouldn't admit it to us. At the end, we said, what'd you think? And she looked at us and went, it was all right. We knew she loved it. It was such a, and then we put on the flip side and she ran out of the room. But it was such a great moment that I remember so strong because we lived in an up and down two-family house. And, that Let It Be was really for her the last Beatle thing because she didn't care about anything else.
Was she sitting in a chair like the one behind me? And were you playing
She actually was in I'll be honest, she was in a red crushed velvet chair.
Of course.
It did look like that. But again, we had the big RCA console.
Yeah,
that
we had one too.
My goodness. And it was a piece of furniture. It wasn't just a turntable, which was odd because I had my suitcase turntable literally like 10 feet away. So I don't know why we had both, but I guess so we could play different things because my mother was playing Sinatra and the Angels Till, which she loved like crazy. And I was playing my stuff, but that memory is so vivid. And I also tell the story about the Beatles again, that my parents were splitting, July of 70, they were done officially. And prior to that, I think in February was the Beatles again, right?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
You're not mistaken.
Well, I'll never forget in New York City in the Daily News, there was a full page ad for the Beatles again, or Hey Jude, whatever they called it at that point. But, it was that album and then all the little albums at the bottom and said on sale. And my father, because we had my friend Bernie, his friend Bernie, owned the record shops at TSS, Times Square store. He ran my mother didn't want my father in the house. So she said to go out and buy that album for him now. Cause they were mad at each other. So she didn't want him in the house and he actually ran out and bought it for me. So I got it, I actually got it a couple of weeks, I think, prior to the actual release because Bernie owned the record store. But those two memories are just so vivid for this, for this period for me. And then my father taking me to see the movie at the drive-in in Valley Stream, just the two of us. And as an 8-year-old, I didn't love the movie until later, but it still was a chance to see the Beatles. Like you said, I still left happy because they played on the roof. So,
absolutely.
And the roof was on my birthday, the rooftop. And that was the other recollection was January 30th is my birthday. So I think it was January 31st. The Daily News had an article about the Beatles playing on the roof. And my mother would always read, and she read me an article about it, and they said, "Oh, did they do it for my birthday?" They did not.
Of course,
very vivid recollection.
Of course, they did.
Yeah, exactly. They did it just for you,
little Mitchie.
No, some unbelievable stuff. Yeah. So, what is your favorite recollection of this time, Bruce?
To me, I really liked the bootleg. Taping it off the radio and having those songs, that Forbidden Fruit that I could listen to. That was a great memory. The Ed Sullivan show of seeing, Let It Be and seeing that performed, and two of us, was very exciting for me. And going out of the theater after the rooftop concert, I just left really upbeat, after sitting through the beginning, and then it picks up steam. And the rooftop concert is a great way to try to remember the Beatles because, prior to that 5-minute clip we've seen of Peter Jackson, I don't know if I ever saw the Beatles looking happier, than on that,
Yeah.
The later phase Beatles anyway, not counting the 64 Beatles.
What are you hoping for with Get Back? I know we talked a little bit about it, but what do you really? I know you said you don't want a whitewash, but are you thinking it's going to be like a 3-hour? Because he doesn't do any movies that are 88 minutes.
No, I mean, I have no idea how long it's going to be, but I hope that the home version has extras that aren't in the theatrical version. I don't think it's going to be a Lord of the Rings type thing where he does a 3-hour movie. I think it's probably, if I had to guess, I'd guess about a 2-hour film, but I have no idea. I've only seen those 5 minutes. I keep trying to justify for health reasons going to New Zealand, but I can't quite justify it.
Because we know that when he showed the reels of 56 hours, I just wanted to jump through the computer and get into that studio and see every single one. No matter how they are.
I would have volunteered to go through everything with him if he had needed an assistant.
Yeah. So tell people where they can get your book and books, please.
Yes, I have a very simple website. It's just Beatle, BEATLE.net. So Beatle without the S.net. And of course, you can get the new book, The Beatles Finally Let It Be. And on the album series books, I have collector's editions, which cost a little bit more, but they come with cases and posters and other goodies, and they're signed and numbered and all that other good stuff. And by the way, if you order the book through my website, regardless, you can always request personalization. I always sign the books because I know people can, quite frankly, they can probably buy the book cheaper on Amazon if they have Amazon Prime and all that other stuff. Of course, Amazon doesn't bubble wrap the books when they ship them, and they probably get dented corners. But if you do order from my website, they will be signed by me, and if you want personalized. And quite frankly, I make more money when people buy from my website. But if you do buy the book at Amazon or elsewhere, and you see me at a Beatle Fest, and you say, will you sign the book? Of course I'll sign the book. So just buy the book. You'll enjoy it.
And what about, Bruce, what about when the movie actually comes out and maybe the record comes out? There's a PDF that's going to be available afterwards too, right?
Well, right now we do have a digital version available, which you can get off the website right now and download. And then if you get the collector's edition, that's free. But what I'm going to do sometime in August or September of this year, assuming the schedule is kept, is that I will do a supplement, and the supplement will be 8 pages. And if you buy the collector's edition, we'll send it to you for free. If you want to buy it for a moderate amount, you can buy it and we'll send it to you, or you can download it for free, even if you didn't buy the book. Okay. So we'll have it available on the website. It'll be, 8 pages that you can print out. It'll be done in such a way that you can print it out and cut it at the bottom and pop it right in the book if you like, because I wanted the book to be as complete as could be. And normally for my books, I am able to, in advance of the book coming out, normally I've been able to actually hear the albums and the outtakes in advance and incorporate those into the book. This time I couldn't do it because it didn't come out at all. So there was no way to do it. And I could have delayed the book, but I really felt it made more sense to put the book out since people had already paid for it. And since also I thought people were going to be looking for something that time of year anyway, so why not put it out?
Well, you keep to your schedule. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I just want to throw in, you talk about Let It Be and stuff, and this connects to the VJ stuff. When I first picked up Let It Be, it was at Lafayette and it was $2.99. Now I'm not sure if it was a counterfeit or not, because I'm
already suspicious.
But you're right. But this was in 1978. You said that United Artists took it away in 1972 out of the catalog. But the other record that was in the same bin that I bought also, and you'll love this, Bruce, was Introducing the Beatles. Both were $2.99.
Yep.
Both most likely a counterfeit.
Yep.
But you know what? Those two records being $2.99 and not $7.99, encouraged me to get more Beatle music. So those two records are, as collectors and as a collector and as a fan, were sort of the continuation of me becoming a Beatle fan.
Are you saying that we need to support the counterfeiters, Rob? Was that where you're going with this, Rob?
Anthony, you're going to love Robert? Anthony, you're going to love what I'm about to say. Counterfeiters, no. Bootleggers, yes. So that's all I will say. Counterfeit is wrong. That's
there you go.
Stealing. Bootleg is not stealing. That's
Providing a service, shall we say?
That's helping the fans be more fans, better fans.
Musical liberation. Nice. Very good, Rob.
Well, look at all the books behind me, folks. Bruce has a ton of the books out. They are incredible books. The Bible, when you go to them. And my mistake was not buying the VJ book because I'm getting into VJ so much now. And there's, 20 different labels for every single and Tolly and all that stuff. And also we have to thank you, Bruce, because a few years ago, we have to thank you for many things, but a few years ago, you also helped make a few of the Beatles singles on Tolly and VJ, some million sellers, and they were certified by the RIA, right?
Yeah, that was quite an experience. When I did the VJ book, I had a whole bunch of paperwork from it. And so what I ended up doing, realizing I have the accounting ledger sheets from 1963 and 64, and flew up to New York, met at the offices of the CPA for the RIAA. And the guy who normally does that was like, yeah, well, where's the Excel spreadsheet? No. And they brought in the oldest person at the firm, the head partner. And he was like, oh my God, ledger sheets. I haven't seen these in decades. And I had monthly sales and quarterly sales and weekly sales in everything. And so they got out and, literally adding machines and everything and went through it. And it was a hell of an experience. And at the end of the day, they determined that out of those 5 records, they could certify sales of 5 million on 4 of the 5, and those became platinum. And then do you want to know a secret? Even though we know it sold over 1 million, technically we could only certify about 935,000. Because what VJ would do, buy 9, get 1 free. Well, they really were selling you 10. And, because it was worded get 1 free, they couldn't count those freebies. So therefore, we didn't break 1 million on Do You Want to Know a Secret? But it was a lot of fun doing it.
What label? I know you were presented with gold and platinums. What label did they use for like Twist and Shout? I think because that was on Tolly, right? Or Tolly, however you say it.
Your assumption that I was presented gold record awards or platinum records awards is sadly not true. I was presented with a letter from the RIAA, and we'll leave it at that. I hope one day that they will make some plaques because they would look good on the wall at Apple and they would look good on the wall in my office.
Yeah, those are that. So we do have
they didn't do it. I'm stunned. At the very least, they could have done like what giving you the option to have a plaque made or something like that.
I think that'll be corrected at some point.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because they do have the picture of the head of VJ or Tolly, whatever, giving the gold record to Disc Limited, I guess, gold record, not RIA certified to the Beatles, and it's a different label than the Tolly label we've seen.
Yeah, so, they for some reason printed Love Me Do labels on a later version of a Tolly label, which is really cool. Now, Love Me Do is in another picture with Ringo, and it's more of a traditional Tolly label from that time frame.
Amazing stuff. And you could find out about all this amazing stuff in these books, folks.
Right. And the thing about the VJ book, it is sold out. It's expensive on the secondary market, but there is a digital version, and the digital version is revised and expanded. So even if you have the print version of the VJ book, you should get the digital because there's a lot of cool new stuff in it, including a chapter on the RIAA certification. And if you go to the RIAA website, you will see that these 4 records were certified, I think it is like in July of 2016.
Yeah,
so
amazing stuff. And I love all the documentation you have in all the books. I mean, all of them. But the VJ one, I've seen it. And it's just, unbelievable stuff. So thank you for everything. Bruce, we could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but we just wanted to plug the book, The Beatles Finally Let It Be. Go buy it. Go buy all of his books at beatle.net. Again, Bruce will personalize, and we do want to say thank you very much. And I know we'll be talking to you again soon. By the way, you want to give us a hint? Is maybe anything coming up in the pipework or no? Or yes or no? Want a hint?
At the end of the book, I kind of did what they did sometimes at the end of a James Bond movies and said James Bond will return. If they weren't sure of the movie, they left it at that. I'm right now concurrently working on 3 different books. I'm not sure which one's next, so I'd rather not say.
No
Awesome.
problem. It's like the end of The Blob, where it says the end, and then it turns into the question mark.
So I will say the Beatles album series shall return, and leave it at that.
Well, we are very happy to hear that. So for Fab Four Free For All, I've been your moderator for tonight, Mitch Axelrod, and joining me as they always do, and I'm very happy that they do, are
Rob Leonard
and
Tony Truardo.
And we appreciate Bruce Spizer for hopping on for this episode, and we want to see you again soon. So join us. Take care.
Okay. Take care.
Fab 4 Free For All was edited and produced by Tony Triguardo at Word of Mouth Studios in Westbury, New York.
The opening and closing theme is My Dolly by the band The Badge, featuring longtime listener Jeff Slate, available on its debut album Digital Retro and recent Best Of compilation, as well as from the Fab 4 Free For All website.
Thanks for listening to Fab 4 Free For All.